Welcome back to Silent Revenge Lab, the best channel for revenge stories. They say you never truly know someone until you're at your lowest. Well, 2 months ago, I wasn't just low, I was fading. I'm Jade Sterling. I'm 32, a pediatric neurosurgeon, and the proud, exhausted mother of 4-year-old twins, Leo and Mia. My life has always been a high-stakes balancing act, but nothing prepared me for the moment a distracted driver plowed into my SUV. As the paramedics cut me out of the wreckage, my only thought wasn't the searing pain in my abdomen or the blood staining my scrubs. It was my children. They were safe at home with a sitter, but I knew I was headed for emergency surgery. I was alone. I was terrified, and I was bleeding out. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone in the ER. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call a friend. I called my parents. For 10 years, I had been their golden goose. I paid for their 5-bedroom colonial, their luxury SUV, and even my sister's designer wardrobe. I thought that surely, in a life-or-death moment, that family bond I'd been subsidizing would mean something. I sent a desperate message to the family group chat. I've been in a massive accident. Internal bleeding. Going into surgery now. Please, I need you to get the twins. The sitter can't stay past 9 p.m. Please help me. I watched the read. Receipts click over.
1, 2,
3. My heart raced faster than the EKG monitor next to me. Then the chime. A single notification that felt like a bullet to the chest. It was from my mother. She wrote, "Jade, honestly, this is so typical. You're always so dramatic when we have big plans. We're literally in the limo on the way to the opera gala. Vanessa spent 4 hours on her hair. We can't just drop everything because you had a fender bender. Figure it out. You're a doctor, aren't you? Use your connections and stop being a burden for once." A burden. The woman who paid their mortgage, their country club fees, and their stress relief vacations was a burden because she was dying. Hold on, before we get into the real stuff, I want to know, what are you doing at this exact moment while hearing my voice? I love seeing your answers down below in the comments. As the anesthesia mask was pressed over my face, a cold, sharp clarity washed over me. It was colder than the surgical suite. I realized that my family didn't love me. They loved my bank account. And as my eyes drifted shut, I made a silent vow. If I woke up from this surgery, the Jade Sterling they knew, the one who said yes to every demand, was never coming back. The surgery lasted 6 hours. I survived. But when I woke up, the first thing I did wasn't calling my mother to apologize for ruining her night. I called my estate attorney and my bank. I was about to show my family exactly what life looked like without their burden to carry them. But I had no idea that while I was cutting them off, my estranged grandfather, a man my parents had told me was a penniless madman, was already on a plane to find me. And what he was carrying would turn their world into a pile of ashes. The revenge hadn't even started yet, but the bill was finally coming due. The recovery room was quiet, but my mind was a war zone. My parents didn't check on me once. Not that night, not the next morning. No flowers, no "are you okay?" texts. Just silence. They assumed I'd handled the inconvenience and that the money train would keep rolling. They were wrong. The first thing I did was call my bank's private wealth manager. For 8 years, I had maintained a joint household account that my parents used for emergencies. In their world, an emergency was a sold-out designer handbag or a kitchen remodel they didn't need. I watched the transaction history on my screen. $4,000 for a gala table, $1,200 for Vanessa's hair and makeup, and $300 for a luxury car service. All spent while I was under the knife. Close the account, I told the manager. Effective immediately. Move the remaining balance to a private trust for my twins. And cancel the supplementary credit cards issued to Richard and Evelyn Sterling. "Are you sure, Dr. Sterling?" the manager asked. "That will leave them with zero liquidity." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied. But I didn't stop there. I called the property management company for the colonial house they lived in. I owned the deed. They were essentially my tenants who paid zero rent. I gave them 30 days notice to vacate. Then I called the insurance provider. My sister Vanessa's brand new convertible? That was on my policy. Not anymore. By 2 p.m., I had effectively erased myself from their financial ecosystem. I was a ghost in their ledger. As the pain meds began to wear off, a nurse walked in with a confused expression. Dr. Sterling? There's a man at the front desk. He says he's your grandfather, Silas Sterling. Well, he's insisting on seeing you, but your records say your grandparents are deceased. My heart stopped. My parents had told me for years that Grandpa Silas had died in a state asylum after losing the family fortune. They called him a stain on the Sterling name. The door pushed open before the nurse could finish. In walked a man who looked nothing like a madman. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit, carried a silver-headed cane, and had eyes that looked like sharpened flint. He didn't look penniless. He looked like he owned the entire hospital. "Jade," he said, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble. "I heard about the accident, and I heard about how those vultures you call parents treated you." "Grandpa," I whispered, my voice cracking. "They told me you were dead." He chuckled, a dry, dark sound. "They wish I was. It's easier to lie about a man than to face the fact that he cut them out of his will 20 years ago for being the same selfish brats they are today. But you're different. I've been watching you, Jade. A surgeon, a mother, and the only one with a spine." He sat down by my bed and placed a heavy, leather-bound folder on my lap. "They think they're entitled to your life because they gave it to you. I'm here to show them what true entitlement looks like." Silas wasn't just there to comfort me. He had been tracking my parents' extracurricular activities, including some very illegal financial moves they'd made using my name while I was busy saving lives in the OR. "They didn't just abandon you at the hospital, Jade," Silas said, leaning in. "They've been stealing from you for years. And now we're going to take it all back." "Stealing," I gasped, the word tasting like copper in my mouth. "Grandpa, I handle all my own bills. I see the statements." Silas let out a cold, sharp laugh. "You see the statements they want you to see, Jade. You're a neurosurgeon. You spend 18 hours a day with your head inside someone's skull. You trusted your father to help with the paperwork because he's family. That was your first mistake. Never trust a man who spends more than he earns." He flipped the page. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a series of loan applications. My heart plummeted as I saw my own signature, or a terrifyingly perfect imitation of it, on documents for a high-interest bridge loan. The amount? $750,000. "They used your medical credentials as collateral," Silas explained, his eyes burning with a quiet fury. "They told the lenders you were expanding a private practice. In reality, they used that money to cover up a failed real estate investment your father made in the Caymans. They've been using your future to gamble on their past." I felt sick. The physical pain from the car accident was nothing compared to the realization that my parents hadn't just neglected me. They were actively sabotaging my children's future. Every dollar I had saved for Leo and Mia's college fund was potentially at risk because of their greed. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Because," Silas said, standing up and straightening his suit jacket, "they think you're incapacitated. They think that while you're in this bed, drugged up and recovering, they can finalize the last stage of their plan, a power of attorney filing that gives them full control over your estate for your own protection." My blood ran cold. They weren't just waiting for me to get better. They were waiting for me to be declared unfit so they could finish picking my bones clean. "But they don't know I'm here," Silas whispered. "And they don't know that I still hold the original Sterling family trust keys. Jade, if you give me the word, we don't just stop them. We dismantle them." I looked at the documents. I looked at the proof of their betrayal. The mother who told me I was a burden while I was bleeding out was currently trying to steal my house. "What do we do first?" I asked. Silas smiled, and for the first time, I saw the madman my parents were so afraid of. It wasn't madness. It was a ruthless, calculated intelligence. "First," he said, "we let them think they've won. Let them show up at your house tonight to check on the twins. Let them find out the locks have been changed by a new owner. And when they call you screaming, you don't answer. I will. They were expecting a grieving daughter and an open door. They were about to find a legal brick wall. My parents didn't show up at my house with groceries or toys for my children. They showed up with a notary. From my hospital bed, I watched the entire scene through my doorbell camera. Silas sat beside me, sipping coffee, watching the small screen with the intensity of a grandmaster watching a chess match. On the screen, my mother, Evelyn, reached for her key, the key I had given her for emergencies. She slid it into the lock. She turned. Nothing. She frowned, jiggling the handle. She tried again, more forcefully this time. "Richard, the key isn't working," she hissed, her voice picking up clearly on the high-definition audio. "Don't be ridiculous, Evelyn," my father grumbled, shoving her aside. "You're probably turning it the wrong way." He jammed his own key into the deadbolt, but it wouldn't even enter the cylinder. "What is this?" Richard barked, pounding on the door.
Jade.
"Open this door. We know you're in there, or the sitter is. We have legal documents to sign." "Legal documents. Not, are you okay?" "Not. How are the twins?" "Just sign the papers." The sitter, whom I had already instructed and paid a massive bonus to, didn't answer. She was upstairs with the twins, the lights off, the back door already guarded by a private security firm Silas had hired. She changed the locks. Evelyn gasped, her voice reaching a frantic pitch. "That little brat actually changed the locks."
How dare she?
"After everything we've done for her? Richard, the mortgage payment is due on the Colonial in 3 days. If we can't get her to sign the bridge loan authorization, we're finished." I looked at Silas.
They're not even worried about me.
"They're worried about the mortgage on the house I bought them." "Wait for it," Silas whispered. On the screen, my father pulled out his phone. My bedside table buzzed. I didn't pick it up. He called again, and again. On the 5th try, Silas reached out and took the phone from my hand. "Answer it," Silas commanded. "Put it on speaker. Let them hear the voice of the man they buried 20 years ago." I swiped the screen. "Hello, Father," I said, my voice cold and steady.
Jade.
"What the hell is going on?" Richard screamed into the phone. "We're standing on your porch like common beggars. The keys don't work. Open this door right now, or I'm calling the police to report you as mentally unstable." "The police are already on their way, Richard." A new voice boomed. Silas leaned over the phone, his face inches from the mic. "But they aren't coming to let you in. They're coming to serve you with a restraining order and a notice of immediate eviction from the Sterling Colonial." There was a deafening silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the wind whistling through the trees on the porch. Who is this?" Richard stammered, his voice trembling. "It's the stain on the family name, Richard," Silas said with a predatory grin. "I'm back, and I've spent the last 6 hours reviewing the fraud you committed in my granddaughter's name. You have 10 minutes to get off Jade's property before the security team removes you by force." The look on their faces as the first patrol car pulled up was worth more than the $2 million they had tried to steal. But this was just the lockout. The real reckoning, the one that would strip them of their dignity and their designer clothes, was only just beginning. "Grandpa," I said as the call ended. "They mentioned a bridge loan. If they don't get that money, what happens?" Silas looked at me, his eyes cold. "If they don't get that money by Friday, they don't just lose the house. They lose everything, including their freedom." The air in my hospital room felt different now. The heavy fog of daughterly duty had finally lifted, replaced by a cold, surgical precision. I was no longer a victim. I was a strategist. "Friday," I whispered, looking at the calendar on my phone. "That's only 72 hours away." 72 hours until their world implodes, Silas added, checking his pocket watch. "That bridge loan they took out? It has a cross-default clause. If they miss the payment on the Cayman debt, the lenders have the right to seize any assets tied to the Sterling name. Since they forged your signature to tie your assets to their debt, they think they've trapped you. They think you'll pay just to save your own credit score." I leaned back against the pillows, a sharp pain shooting through my side, reminding me of why I was here. "They underestimated one thing, Grandpa." "And what's that?" "I'm a surgeon," I said, my voice dropping an octave. I know exactly how much a body can endure before it stops feeling. I've already written off my credit score. I can rebuild that.
But
They can't rebuild a reputation built on lies. While I was recovering, the panic at the Colonial was reaching a fever pitch. My sister, Vanessa, the one who couldn't miss the opera for my surgery, was finally realizing that her allowance was gone. What do you mean the card is restricted? Vanessa shrieked, throwing her phone onto the velvet sofa. I'm at the spa. This is humiliating, Mom. Just call Jade and tell her to stop this tantrum. She's not answering. Vanessa? Evelyn screamed back, her perfectly coiffed hair now a frizzy mess. And that ghost, Silas, is with her. He's blocked every channel. We can't even get past the hospital security. Richard sat at the mahogany desk, staring at a legal notice. It's not just the cards, Evelyn. The property management company just sent a courier. We have to be out of this house in 30 days. But the loan, if we don't pay the $750,000 by Friday, the private lenders are coming for the cars. And then the police will be looking at those signatures we used. Back in the hospital, Silas was handing me a pen. They're going to try one last desperate move, Jade. They'll try to play on your guilt. They'll use the one thing they think you still care about, the family legacy. The legacy they dragged through the mud? I countered.
Exactly.
Tomorrow is the Sterling Foundation's annual charity gala. You're the honorary chair, even if you're in a hospital bed. They're planning to show up and make a public plea, claiming you're not in your right mind due to the accident. They want to humiliate you into submission in front of the city's elite. I looked at my surgical scars, then at the folder of evidence Silas had compiled. A slow, predatory smile spread across my face. Then let's give them a show they'll never forget, I said. Grandpa, can you get me a dress? And a very good makeup artist? I'm checking myself out of this hospital tomorrow. Jade, you're in no condition to. I'm a doctor, Silas. I know exactly how much localized anesthetic I need to stand for 2 hours. If they want to use the public eye to break me, they're about to find out that the light is much harsher when it's pointed back at them. The plan was set. The parents thought Friday was their deadline. They didn't realize that Thursday night was their funeral. Pain is a funny thing. It can either paralyze you, or it can become the fuel that keeps you upright. As I looked at my reflection, I didn't see a victim of a car crash. I saw a woman who was about to perform the most delicate surgery of her life, removing a cancer that had been growing in her family for decades. You look like a Sterling, Silas said, standing in the doorway of my private recovery suite. He held out a vintage diamond necklace, one that belonged to my grandmother, the one my mother had been trying to find in safety deposit boxes for years. And you look like the woman who owns the room. I don't just want to own the room, Grandpa, I said, wincing slightly as I adjusted the silk bodice over my stitched side. I want to dismantle the stage they're standing on, the Sterling Charity Gala. It was the social event of the year, filled with the city's most influential donors, medical board members, and press. My parents strode in, heads held high, though I could see the sweat on my father's brow from the security feed on my phone. They were here to play the grieving, worried parents of a daughter who had suffered a mental break after her accident. They took their seats at the head table, the seats I had paid for. Richard began leaning into the ear of the medical board president. It's tragic, really, I heard him say through the remote lapel mic Silas had planted on the table earlier. The head injury was more severe than the doctors let on. She's erratic. We're having to take over her affairs just to keep her children safe. Evelyn dabbed at a fake tear. She's even blocked us from the house. It's the trauma speaking. We just want our daughter back. The whispers started like a ripple in a pond. I didn't walk in with a limp. I walked in with Silas Sterling on my arm, the dead patriarch and the unstable daughter. The blood drained from my mother's face so fast I thought she might actually faint. Richard's glass of scotch hit the tablecloth with a dull thud. I didn't head for the table. I headed straight for the stage. Good evening, everyone, I said, my voice echoing through the silent hall. I'm sure many of you have heard rumors about my health and my mental state over the last 48 hours. Most of those rumors, ironically, were shared by the people sitting at table 1. I looked directly at my parents. The cameras turned toward them. They say I'm a nuisance and a burden. I continued, my voice steady as a heartbeat. They said that while I was bleeding internally in the ER 2 nights ago. But tonight, I'm here to talk about a different kind of burden. The burden of debt, forgery, and the theft of a legacy. Wait, Richard shouted, standing up, his chair screeching against the floor. Jade, you're confused. This is private family business. Oh, Richard. Silas's voice boomed from the floor as he stepped into the light. The only thing private about this is going to be your conversation with the district attorney. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the frantic clicking of camera shutters. I stood at the podium, the cold weight of the microphone in my hand feeling like a scalpel. I wasn't just Jade Sterling, the tired mom anymore. I was the surgeon, and I was cutting out the rot. If you look at the screen, I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade, you'll see the $750,000 bridge loan my father mentioned. You'll notice the date. It was filed while I was performing a 10-hour craniotomy on a 6-year-old child. Unless I've mastered the art of being in 2 places at once, this is a felony. Evelyn lurched forward, her face a mask of panicked rage.
Jade.
Stop this madness. You're humiliated us. You're ruining Vanessa's future. Vanessa's future? I laughed, a sharp, hollow sound that echoed off the gilded ceiling. Vanessa's future was bought with the money I saved for my children's surgery funds. While I was in the ICU, you weren't at my bedside. You were in a limo, paid for by me, on your way to a gala, while my twins were nearly left alone because you wouldn't miss a party. My father, Richard, tried one last desperate gambit. He didn't look at me. He looked at the crowd, at the bankers, and the board members he'd spent years grooming. Don't listen to her. She's on heavy medication. This old man, Silas, he's brainwashed her. He's a mental patient. Silas didn't flinch. He walked slowly toward the head table, his silver-headed cane tapping rhythmically on the marble floor. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like a countdown. The only thing mental about me, Richard, Silas said, stopping inches from my father's face, is that I was crazy enough to believe you'd actually care for your daughter. I spent 20 years in self-imposed exile, watching you drain the sterling name of its honor. But I kept the receipts. All of them. Silas pulled a flash drive from his pocket and held it up. On this drive is the paper trail for the Cayman accounts, the offshore transfers, and the evidence of the accidental fire at the warehouse 10 years ago that you used to collect the insurance money. The color left Richard's face. He didn't just look defeated. He looked like a man who had just seen the trapdoor open beneath his feet. Jade, Richard whispered, his voice cracking, please. We're family. If you do this, we go to prison. You wouldn't do that to your own father. I looked down at him from the stage. I thought about the text message. You've always been a nuisance and a burden. I thought about the internal bleeding and the shaking hands. You're right, Richard, I said, leaning into the mic. I wouldn't do that to my father. But my father died to me the moment he chose a gala over his daughter's life.
You?
You're just a stranger who's been living in my house. The room erupted. My mother began to scream, a high-pitched, jagged sound, while my father looked around for an exit that didn't exist. Wait, I said, stopping the investigators for a brief second. There's one more thing. You talked a lot about the sterling legacy tonight, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the hall. But there's a part of the legacy you forgot. The Sterlings don't just build things. We protect what matters.
And you?
You are the predator I'm protecting my children from. I looked at the medical board president, who was staring at my parents in utter disgust. I am formally requesting a full forensic audit of every charitable donation processed through my parents' names over the last 5 years. I suspect the burden I've been carrying wasn't just their lifestyle, it was their crimes. Evelyn collapsed into her chair, sobbing into her silk napkins, but no one moved to comfort her. The socialites who had been sipping champagne with her 10 minutes ago were now physically recoiling. Vanessa was already gone, having slipped out a side door to avoid the cameras, leaving her parents to face the music alone. As the investigators led Richard and Evelyn out of the ballroom, the crowd began to murmur, then surge forward. They wanted quotes. They wanted to offer support now that the power had shifted. But I didn't want their pity. I stepped down from the stage, my side throbbing with every step. Silas was there instantly, his arm providing the strength I lacked. "You did it, Jade," he whispered. "You cut the tie." "It doesn't feel like a victory yet, Grandpa," I admitted, looking at the empty seats at table 1. "It feels like an amputation. Sometimes you have to lose a limb to save the life," Silas said firmly. "Now, come. We have one more stop to make before the sun rises." The bridge loan isn't the only thing they were hiding. "Where are we going?" I asked, leaning my head against the cool glass of the window. "To the vault," Silas replied. "The one your father didn't know existed. The one I opened 40 years ago and promised never to touch unless the family was in true peril. He thought he was stealing your future, Jade. He had no idea I had already secured it." We pulled up to a nondescript, high-security private storage facility. Silas led me through 3 layers of biometric checks until we reached a small, velvet-lined room. On the table sat a single, weathered wooden box. "Your father spent his life chasing paper wealth," Silas said, sliding the box toward me. "He wanted status. He wanted the grandpa spoke moment to be about gold. But your grandmother and we knew better." I opened the box. My breath hitched. It wasn't gold bars or stacks of cash. It was a collection of journals, old blueprints, and a set of keys to a property I had never heard of. "What is this?" I whispered. "It's the deed to the Sterling Research Institute," Silas said. "A facility I founded in secret. It's been operating under a blind trust for decades. And as of tonight, the chief executive and majority shareholder isn't me. It's you." But as I looked closer at the journals, a name caught my eye. A name written in my mother's handwriting on a scrap of paper tucked into the back of a ledger. It was a name connected to my car accident. My blood turned to ice. "Grandpa, the driver who hit me. Look at this." My heart wasn't just racing, it was hammering against my ribs. The name on that scrap of paper was Mark Vance. I recognized it instantly. He was the driver of the truck that had plowed into my SUV. The man the police report dismissed as distracted and uninsured. But why was his name in my mother's handwriting? And why was it tucked inside a ledger of special expenses? "Grandpa," I whispered, my voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. "This date, this entry is from 3 days before my accident. Next to his name, there's an amount. $50,000. It's listed as consultation fee." Silas leaned over, his eyes narrowing into slits of pure steel. He took the paper from my hand, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his cane. "They didn't just want your money, Jade. They were losing control. They knew if you died, everything, the house, the trust, the insurance, would revert to them as the guardians of your children." The room felt like it was spinning. It was one thing to be neglected. It was another to be a nuisance. But this was a hit. They hadn't just refused to help me while I was bleeding. They had paid for the blood to be spilled. "They tried to kill me," I said, the words finally breaking through the shock. "My own parents tried to leave my children orphans for a $2 million insurance payout and a house." "They were desperate," Silas growled, his voice vibrating with a terrifying calm. "And desperate people don't think about the soul. They think about the bottom line. But they made one fatal mistake. They hired a man who was as sloppy as they were, and they left a trail right here in the one place they thought I'd never let you see. They aren't just going to prison for fraud, Grandpa," I said, my voice cold and hard as a surgical blade. "They're going away for life." I grabbed my phone. I didn't call the police yet. I called the one person who could make sure they never saw a moment of peace again. I called the private investigator Silas had used. "Find Mark Vance," I commanded. "He's a distracted driver with 50,000 reasons to talk. Tell him if he gives up the people who hired him, I won't sue him into the dirt. Tell him he has 1 hour." "What are you going to do?" Silas asked, watching me with a mixture of pride and concern. "I'm going to the precinct," I said, grabbing the ledger. I want to be the last thing they see before the cell door closes. I want them to look into the eyes of the burden that survived. The final confrontation was minutes away. Richard and Evelyn were already in holding cells for the fraud. They thought they were just facing a few years of white-collar prison. They had no idea I was coming with a life sentence. The smell of stale coffee and industrial cleaner filled the air. Inside the small, cramped interview room, my parents looked like shadows of their former selves. The expensive silk of my mother's blouse was wrinkled. My father's designer tie was gone, confiscated as a suicide risk. They were arguing in hushed, frantic whispers until they saw me through the glass. They didn't look remorseful. They looked relieved.
Jade.
Evelyn shrieked, lunging toward the glass. Thank God. You have to tell them this is all a misunderstanding. Tell them about the medication. Tell them you're confused. Richard stood up, trying to summon his old authority. Jade, listen to me. We can fix this. Silas is using you to get back at us. We did what we had to do to keep the family afloat. We're your parents. I stood there, silent. I didn't say a word for a full minute. I let the silence stretch until it became a physical weight in the room. I let them realize that the golden goose had finally stopped laying eggs. I found the ledger. I said finally, my voice a whisper that made them freeze. I found Mark Vance. The blood didn't just drain from my father's face. His entire body seemed to shrink. My mother's hand, pressed against the glass, began to tremble uncontrollably. $50,000, I continued. That was the price of my life. That was the price of your grandchildren being left without a mother. Did you think a car accident would be cleaner than a lawyer? Did you think I'd just disappear? Jade, honey, no. Evelyn stammered, her eyes darting around the room. That was for a consultant. For the business. Mark Vance just confessed. I lied. I didn't need him to yet. The terror in their eyes was the only confession I needed to know I was right. He's talking to the district attorney in the next room. He's trading your names for his freedom. You called me a nuisance, I said, leaning closer to the glass. You called me a burden while I was fighting for my life. But today, the burden is gone. I've sold the Colonial. I've liquidated the Sterling Trust. I've moved the twins to a place you will never find. You aren't parents anymore. You aren't even Sterlings. You're just inmates number 4092 and number 4093. I turned to the detective. I'm done here. As I walked out of that precinct, the morning sun finally broke over the horizon. Silas was waiting by the car, Leo and Mia asleep in the back seat. He didn't ask what happened. He just opened the door. My parents thought they could steal my life, but all they did was set me free. They wanted the Sterling legacy. They got it. A legacy of silence, stone walls, and the memory of the daughter who finally fought back. Sometimes the best way to move forward is to cut the weight that's holding you down. If you enjoyed this story of justice and silent revenge, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear that they aren't a burden. Don't forget to subscribe to Silent Revenge Lab for more stories where the underdog finally takes the throne. Comment below with the word freedom if you would have done exactly what Jade did.